In a serene suburban neighborhood, a routine parking conflict escalates into a fierce confrontation with authority and privilege. A disabled resident faces off against an overbearing HOA leader and her reckless offspring, revealing hidden offenses and culminating in well-deserved accountability. This narrative highlights resilience, evidence, and the triumph of fairness over tyranny. I attempted to use my municipally designated accessible parking area, only to find it obstructed by the association head's offspring in his gleaming crimson sports vehicle. The following day, that identical automobile rested on concrete supports, surrounded by law enforcement, with a citation fluttering in the breeze. They believed their position granted them immunity. However, they overlooked my entryway recording device, documented records, and a serious offense documentation that connected them to an issue far greater than mere vehicle placement. But prior to exploring further, inform me of your viewing location in the comment section. You understand? The amusing aspect regarding a scarlet sports car elevated on 4 masonry units is that it ceases to appear speedy. It simply seems pitiful, resembling a large, lustrous, costly ornament. And when positioned directly within an accessible parking zone, my accessible zone, with a pair of authorities examining it as though it materialized unexpectedly, well, that's a unique form of splendid. The azure boundaries displayed notice and everything. Karen Jameson failed to see the splendor. Her complexion shifted to a similar hue as the automobile, a patchy, enraged scarlet that contrasted with her neutral professional attire. She was shouting naturally. That was her standard mode. Her tone could strip coating from a water outlet from a considerable distance. The uniformed official, Officer Brady, a youthful female, continued composing her infraction notice without glancing upward. Her writing instrument produced a consistent scraping noise that was delightful to my hearing. The additional one, Investigator Miller, remained with his limbs folded, weary gaze, resembling an individual who had witnessed larger culprits attempt minor deceptions. Her offspring, Ryan, the arrogant possessor of the currently immobile luxury automobile, positioned himself adjacent to her. He resembled a young canine that had recently received a tap on the snout with a periodical. His typical arrogant grin had vanished, substituted by a surprised, loose-mouthed bewilderment. He repeatedly shifted his gaze from the elevated vehicle to the officials to his parents, then returned to the vehicle as if his intellect struggled to link the elements to why spouse Nancy positioned herself next to me on our veranda, grasping a cup of hot beverage. She consumed a composed swallow and remarked, sufficiently audible for only me, "She's likely to rupture a vein." I merely grinned. I supported myself with my walking aid. The familiar compression is a reassuring companion. My limb support emitted a slight creak. It's a noise I've endured for 2 decades. It's the noise of my requirement for that area. It's the noise explaining this entire magnificent chaos occurring initially. You're likely observing this scene. Me, a senior gentleman with a creaky limb, this yelling association leader, and a sports car immobilized. And you're pondering how we arrived at this point. It's quite a tale. And the coding on those azure boundaries is significant. Similar to many compelling narratives, it commenced modestly. It began with that identical minor creak from my support and a substantial amount of presumption station where it shouldn't be. It all initiated on an ordinary occasion. The atmosphere was clear, avian creatures were vocalizing enthusiastically, and my lower joint was forecasting precipitation soon. It's superior to the meteorologist. That joint. I was returning from a rehabilitation session, one of the regular pleasures of conflicting with a slick surface and a transport vehicle in my earlier years. Nancy was operating the vehicle. She consistently does on session occasions. My limb resembles a damp strand afterward that we navigated into our lane, Falls pathway, and I was already contemplating a chilled beverage and elevating my limbs. Falls domain appears elegant, correct? It's not. It's a pleasant, tranquil area of neat dwellings, the sort of location individuals relocate to when fatigued by urban clamor. The sole issue is they provided the area with a homeowners group, akin to supplying a child with a charged firearm. It's merely a question of when harm occurs. Our residence is located on a serene curve of Fallswood Pathway, and directly ahead exists a solitary, lovely municipally required accessible parking area. My area. It's not merely a comfort, it's essential. The stroll from the standard visitor placement to my entrance on a difficult occasion resembles traversing a barren land. That azure rectangular shape is my refuge. As we curve the bend, my vision immediately directed to it, and my spirit declined. There, shining under the midday illumination like an enormous, presumptuous fruit, was a vibrant scarlet sports vehicle. I captured an image, registration, and moment stamp, then positioned my device on the panel. It was stationed at an angle, occupying the entire area and a portion of the striped zone beside it. It belonged to Ryan Jameson. "Oh, for goodness sake," I whispered. Nancy extended her arm and placed a palm on mine. She understands my reactions. I'm not typically an irate individual, but certain elements ignite my temper. Deliberate unawareness is one. Obvious disregard is another. This was a dual offense. "Calm inhalation, Lyle," she stated, her tone as serene as a tranquil body of water. Perhaps he was merely delivering an item for his parents. I examined the vehicle. The motor was inactive. No occupant inside. Karen Jameson's dwelling was nearby. If delivering, he was taking an extended path. I retrieved my device. "No," I responded. "Delivery requires minimal duration. He's been present longer. I'm recording it." Nancy exhaled, but she refrained from intervening. She recognizes that regarding this, I remain firm. It's not about triviality. It's about values. That area exists for a purpose. A purpose embedded in my limb with metal fasteners and panels. She maneuvered our vehicle to the edge a short distance along the path. I contacted the Municipal Vehicle Regulation Authority, a contact I regrettably have stored. A female's tone responded, appearing disinterested. "Vehicle regulation. How may I assist?" I activated the amplifier and placed it on the panel. I desired Nancy to listen. I desired the vehicle to listen. I desired the entire globe to hear that I was proceeding correctly. "Greetings," I stated, maintaining my tone stable and courteous. "My identity is Lyle Stanford. I reside at 112 Falls Pathway. I must report a conveyance unlawfully stationed in a specified accessible zone." "All right, sir. Location is 112 Falls Pathway." "Correct. It's the sole specified area on the section. Unmistakable. And the conveyance details, it's a Scarlet Sports vehicle, recent version. Registration indicates Rapid R, with the character R. Quite creative?" Nancy chuckled softly. I offered her a minor gesture. The operator seemed oblivious to my irony. "Scarlet Sports vehicle registration Rapid R, noted. Is the area appropriately indicated, sir?" "Yes, madam," I responded. "A large azure indicator with the mobility symbol states offenders will be cited and removed. The edge is coded azure. The zone itself features a massive pale mobility symbol coded on it. An individual with visual impairment on a rapid steed could recognize it's an accessible area." "Very well, sir. We'll send a team. It could take some time. We're occupied." "I comprehend," I stated. "Appreciate your assistance." I terminated the call. The quietness in the vehicle felt substantial. The Scarlet Sports vehicle remained there, complacent and mute. It was a tribute to someone who believed regulations didn't pertain to them. Nancy regarded me. "You realize who's going to emerge before the removal vehicle, correct?" she inquired. "The dominant figure is about to become agitated." And precisely as anticipated, just as I contemplated the waiting period, the entrance of the Jameson residence opened abruptly. The removal vehicle was distant, but before it could arrive, the dominant figure herself, Karen Jameson, emerged from her abode, and she was displeased. Karen advanced along the walkway, resembling a commander inspecting her forces. She possesses this gait, a rigid-backed, elevated chin march that conveys, "I possess this path, and you're fortunate I permit your usage." Her light hair was rigidly styled into an ideal covering, and her expression was fixed in a facade of absolute outrage. She noticed our vehicle stationed along the edge and headed directly toward us. I lowered my pane. Best to conclude it. Lyle, she commenced, omitting a greeting. Her tone oozed that artificial sugary politeness she employs when preparing to inform you your award-winning flowers violate some unclear regulation she fabricated. Lyle, what is this situation? I merely regarded her, then directed my digit toward the sports vehicle. This is a crimson automobile, Karen. It's stationed in an accessible zone unlawfully. She gestured dismissively, a motion she'd refined over periods of group gatherings. Oh, truly, it's Ryan's automobile. He intended a brief duration. He was assisting with provisions. I glanced at the vacant area. No provisions visible. No, Ryan present. Brief duration? I inquired, verifying my timepiece. Karen, we've been present for extended. My brief and your brief must operate on distinct mechanisms. Is it a unique group time region I'm unaware of? Her grin stiffened. The sugar began to sour. No requirement for that manner with me, Lyle. The manner authorities. That was her preferred tactic. When you possess facts, and she possesses emotions, she critiques the manner. It's a standard intimidator strategy. Nancy, my serene, rational Nancy, inclined from the companion seat. In fact, Karen, she stated, her tone agreeable yet resolute. Municipal Regulation 14B Part 3 is explicit. The accessibility indicator is municipal regulation. The group has no influence. There is no brief leniency for a specified accessible zone. The instant a conveyance lacking the appropriate tag or registration halts in one, it's offending. Karen's gaze narrowed at Nancy. She despises when individuals cite regulations back at her, particularly when they're genuine regulations, not the one she invents. Well, I'm certain the municipality has superior tasks than bothering my offspring over a basic error. It's not an error if intentional, I responded. And this is an initial, Karen. It's the third this period. I overlooked the prior two. I'm not overlooking this. Her expression transitioned from irritated to furious. The facade was removed. You contacted them, correct? You contacted vehicle regulation on my offspring. After all, I contribute to this area. What she contributed to the area was assessing individuals' turf with a measuring tool and dispatching menacing correspondences about the hue of their entry rugs. She was a minor despot on a small seat that I did. I affirmed, my tone even. The indicator states offenders will be cited and removed. I'm merely aiding the indicator to perform its duty. Just then, as if summoned by the tension, Ryan emerged from his dwelling. He was an identical replica of his father. Identical complacent smile that conveys, I'm superior, and we both acknowledge it. He observed the situation, saw his mother arguing with me, and merely chuckled. He rattled his keys in his palm. Relax, mother, he stated, approaching his automobile. It's insignificant. He directed a glance at me, a dismissive minor smirk. He uttered nothing to me, just entered his valued automobile. The motor activated with a loud, irritating noise that resonated along our tranquil path. He reversed from the area, screeching his wheels slightly for display, and then accelerated along the path. At the intersection, he swerved sharply, chuckled, and accelerated further. I refrained, and precisely at that instant, a large heavy removal vehicle from municipal storage navigated the intersection. The operator observed the now vacant area, observed us, shrugged, and continued operating. Karen observed her offspring depart, then turned back to me. Her gaze resembled small fragments of frost. You'll receive communication from the group? Lyle, she whispered. You and your manner. She rotated on her foot and advanced back to her dwelling. I observed her departure, then regarded Nancy. Well, I started. That proceeded as anticipated. Nancy merely shook her head, a minor grin on her lips. You provoke the beast, dear. Occasionally the beast requires provocation, I replied, engaging the vehicle to finally position into my now empty area. She was faithful to her statement, naturally. Karen wasn't one for empty warnings. The official group imprinted electronic message arrived in my reception shortly after, a virtual announcement of conflict. The message came with a minor alert while I was finally savoring my chilled beverage. The title was foreboding. Formal notification of offense. Falls domains group that I anticipated it, but it still caused my vital pressure to rise slightly. I accessed it. The wording was pure organizational gibberish, filled with whereas and henceforth, all intended to make a basic warning resemble a legal text engraved in rock. It originated from the official group panel address, but I could sense Karen's minor fury in every term. And what was my major offense? What was the offense so dreadful it necessitated immediate formal notification? I navigated down. Offense Article 7, Section 4, unauthorized yard decorations that I blinked. I reviewed it. Yard decorations. It proceeded to describe in exhaustive detail a pottery statue of a playful character, roughly a foot tall, situated in the front floral area. I looked out the opening at my front floral area. Nancy's blooms were fully flowering, and directly amid them, donning a pointed scarlet cap and grasping a small angling rod, was Norman, the yard sprite. Norman. She was penalizing me for yard sprite. A sprite Nancy had acquired at an artisan event previously, a sprite who had remained in that precise location, disturbing no one for an extended period. Nancy, I summoned. You won't accept this. She approached and reviewed the message over my shoulder. She remained silent momentarily. Then she stated, Norman. She's targeting Norman. That friend. I had a chuckle. It was so absurd, so obviously retaliatory that it was nearly humorous. Nearly. But I understood the mechanism. First the alert, then the penalties. And Karen adored imposing penalties. It was her preferred aspect of the role. She'd attempt to penalize us into compliance. But she was confronting the incorrect individual. I don't become enraged. I become systematic. I inform Nancy. She believes this is a contest of striker protrusion. She strikes me with an offense. I retreat. Not this occasion. I didn't respond to the message. That's what she desired. She desired me to participate, to debate, to become sentimental so she could critique my manner again. Instead, I initiated 2 communications. My initial communication was to the Fallswood Domains administration firm. They're the external managers who oversee the group's finances and documents. They're a nameless enterprise in the center, but they must adhere to the actual registered group regulations, not merely Karen's caprices. I connected with a pleasant lady named Brenda. I described the circumstance calmly. Brenda, I stated, I've obtained an offense notice for a yard sprite. Could you inform me where in the official filed regulations I can locate the rule against them? I've just reviewed Article 7, and it relates to barriers and outbuildings. Nothing smaller than a canine shelter. Brenda placed me on pause. I could hear her inputting. She returned shortly after. You're correct, Mr. Stanford. She stated, Article 7, Section 4 concerns unauthorized building additions. I can't locate any reference to ornamental statues or sprites in the regulations whatsoever. The leader can't simply create an offense. I'll note in your record that this is invalid. Appreciate it, Brenda, I responded. Could you send me verification of that for my documents? She affirmed she would. One resolved. My second communication was to the Municipal Design and Transit Division. I desired to secure the other aspect of this. I inquired about the accessibility indicator in front of my dwelling. I have an inquiry, I stated to the gentleman who responded. The accessible area on my lane. Is that an advisory indicator installed by the homeowners group, or is it an official municipal indicator? He requested the location. I heard additional inputting. No, sir, he responded, his tone resolute. That is entirely a municipally placed, legally enforceable parking rule. It was placed in compliance with the disabilities legislation. A group has no authority over it. They can't permit anyone to station there, and they can't instruct you not to contact us if someone is stationed there unlawfully. That indicator bears the complete authority of state and municipal law. That's what I believed. I said, I appreciate you very much. I terminated the call and grinned. I possessed it all. Karen's false offense was nullified, and her assertion that she had any control over that parking area was a total illusion. I preserved Brenda's message right beside a capture of the municipal regulation Nancy had referenced earlier. I was constructing a collection, a neat minor folder of facts. On the binder edge, Nancy inscribed in marker Karen Jameson, proofs. Because I sensed this was merely the initial strike in a prolonged, foolish conflict. I possessed the law supporting me. I possessed the facts supporting me. But that evening, as obscurity descended over the domains, Ryan Jameson concluded he was the sole law that mattered. The gathering commenced. It wasn't a subdued minor assembly. It was a complete sensory attack. A deep rhythm began pulsating through our barriers, vibrating the images in the corridor. I looked out the opening. The Jameson dwelling, typically dim and silent, was illuminated like a gaming establishment. Vehicles I'd never observed lined both sides, some partially on turfs. It was an outdoor collegiate celebration in the midst of our tranquil lane. Nancy was attempting to peruse a volume, but she kept recoiling every time the rhythm struck. "Should we contact the authorities about the disturbance?" she inquired. "Not immediately," I responded, a strategy already forming in my mind. "Let's provide them additional leeway." I proceeded to the entrance. Our entry bell recorder has an excellent broad view of the lane. I ensured the movement notifications were active and the capture quality was elevated. I did likewise for the protection recorder I have attached on the edge of our storage. It encompasses my entry path and a substantial portion of the roadway in front of Ryan's dwelling. I was going to be the official chronicler of this minor event. For the subsequent periods, I had a prime position to the most foolish display imaginable. My device alerted with movement notifications, each one a minor presented piece of proof. I sat in my seat, observing the live transmissions like it was a film. Ryan and some of his companions came stumbling out to the sports vehicle, which was stationed in his entry path for a variation. He entered, activated the motor until it howled, and then performed a brief, shrieking tire mark, leaving a strip of dark material on the surface. The recorder captured it all distinctly. I preserved the segment and titled it Entry Path Damage. One of the gathering attendees, a youth barely adult, attempted to traverse a straight path along the walkway and failed dramatically. He stumbled over his own limbs and collided directly into the postal container of our neighbor, Mr. Henderson. The recorder documented the distinct crumple of metal and the youth chuckling as he rose and staggered back to the gathering. I titled that one postal container Chaos. Throughout, the recordings displayed a consistent flow of individuals traversing the lane and front turf with open ale and spirit containers. Another evident group rule breach, not to mention a possible public inebriation matter. I captured several clear images of that, but the climax arrived late. The gathering was finally diminishing. A few vehicles had departed, and then without cause, Ryan returned to his automobile. He entered, started it, and merely remained there accelerating the motor. Not a minor press. He was maximizing it, allowing the motor to howl and misfire repeatedly for a substantial period. The noise was overwhelming. It was pure spiteful, attention-seeking presumption. The storage recorder captured the entire event. The gauge illumination flashing crimson on his panel. The discharge tube expelling flames. I preserved the segment, titling it Late Arousal, that I finally deactivated the display. I possessed an entire assortment of recording proofs. Disturbance, breaches, destruction, property harm, public consumption. Karen desired to wage a conflict over Sprite. Fine. I was about to arrive with heavy artillery. Nancy had long retired with ear blockers. She was concerned. Before resting, she placed a palm on my shoulder and stated, "Lyle, exercise caution. These are not logical individuals. Perhaps just release it." I regarded the collection of recording segments I'd preserved on my machine. "This isn't about the Sprite anymore, dear," I murmured to the vacant space. "This is about residing in an area where the regulations apply to all, not just the individuals the ruler dislikes, that I believed the disturbance and the foolishness were the worst. I believed I possessed all the proof required to halt them. I was mistaken. The subsequent morning, in the bright illumination, Ryan nearly deprived me of the most vital element in existence. And this entire matter ceased being a contest. The subsequent morning began tranquil. The lane was scattered with the remnants of a gathering. Crimson disposable containers, tobacco remnants, a stray sandal. The Jameson dwelling was silent, the inhabitants likely recovering from their chaotic evening. The atmosphere was refreshing and sharp, and I was positioned on my front veranda seat, a fresh beverage in my grasp, attempting to savor the calm, while limb was rigid, the cost I paid for remaining awake late. Nancy emerged, attired in her strolling garments. It's her morning custom, a vigorous extended stroll around the area. Regardless of conditions, it's how she clears her thoughts. Morning, late riser, she stated, kissing my face. Don't allow them to affect you today, all right? I'll attempt, I responded, but we both knew I was dishonest. I was already planning my subsequent action, drafting the message I was going to dispatch to the entire group panel, complete with recording links. She grinned, squeezed my shoulder, and began down the entry path. I observed her depart, my wonderful, steady Nancy. She's been the foundation of my existence for decades. She's the serenity to my turmoil, the reason for my obstinacy. Observing her departure, her posture erect, her step assured, I felt that familiar surge of affection and appreciation. She reached the lane's end and turned, heading along the primary section of Fallswood Pathway. I consumed a swallow of my beverage and reclined, listening to the avian sounds. Shortly after, I heard it, the abrupt, furious howl of a motor. I recognized that noise. It was a sports vehicle. I straightened, my heart abruptly pounding. The noise intensified, nearer, excessively rapid, far too rapid. I looked along the lane, and my vital fluid chilled. The crimson sports vehicle came hurtling around the bend, swerving uncontrollably. Ryan was operating, his complexion a pale, indistinct through the front glass. He was traveling at excessive velocity in a restricted zone, and Nancy was directly there. She was on the walkway, just about to traverse an entry path. She heard the vehicle turn, and her gaze widened. She immobilized for a brief instant, like prey in illumination. The sports vehicle veered, wheels howling in objection. For one terrible, prolonged instant, I thought he would strike her. My thoughts became vacant with horror. I was partially from my seat, a futile exclamation lodged in my throat. She responded. Fortunately, she leaped backward, stumbling from the edge onto the turf of a neighbor's yard. The sports vehicle's rear guard missed her joints by minimal distance. It swung around the rear and swerving again before Ryan adjusted and aligned. And he never reduced velocity. He didn't halt. He didn't glance back. He just maximized the motor and sped along the lane, vanishing around the subsequent curve. The only remaining noises were the diminishing echo of his motor and the frantic pulsing of my own heart. I was down the steps and across the yard before realizing I was moving. My impaired limb protested vehemently. Nancy was already rising, dusting herself. She was pale, her palms trembling slightly, but she attempted to grin. "I'm fine, Lyle," she stated, her tone slightly unsteady. "I'm all right. He's merely a foolish youth." I reached her, my palms hovering, uncertain where to contact, as if she might shatter. The fury that filled me was a pure, intense blaze. It consumed all the minor irritation about parking areas and sprites. This wasn't about regulations anymore. This was about my spouse, my Nancy. He could have ended her, and he lacked the courtesy to halt. "Foolish youths receive instruction," I stated, my tone low and tense. An unfamiliar tone. An instruction is about to commence. We returned to the dwelling, my arm encircling her. The query that had been persistent, what is more important, harmony or equity, was resolved. There would be no harmony in an area where my spouse wasn't secure. It was time for equity. That evening, I didn't rest. I sat before my machine, reviewing every instant of my recorder footage. I wasn't seeking disturbance breaches or minor destruction anymore. I was seeking an instrument, and I discovered one gleaming and rotating right on his wheels. I must have observed the segment numerous times. The footage from the storage recorder was perfectly clear. It displayed the crimson sports vehicle speeding past, the morning illumination reflecting off its polished surface. It displayed Nancy leaping back onto the grass. Every observation, that cold knot of anger tightened in my stomach. But after repeated views, my focus altered. I ceased observing Nancy. I began observing the vehicle. My preparation as a technician, all those years examining diagrams and plans, taught me to notice the particulars. I started dissecting the vehicle into its parts: the frame, the panes, the wheels. That I paused the recording right at the instant the vehicle was nearest to the recorder, filling the display. I enlarged and then enlarged again right on the front wheel. The edges were custom. They weren't the standard manufacturer wheels that accompanied the vehicle. These were elaborate, with numerous slender spokes extending from the center, all in a shiny dark finish with a thin polished metallic rim around the outer boundary. They were showy, costly, and for some reason they seemed familiar. I reclined in my seat, closing my vision. Where had I seen those wheels previously? It wasn't on another vehicle in the area. I would have recalled. It was elsewhere. An image, perhaps. I considered my relative Mitchell, an automobile enthusiast who always sent me connections to vehicle exhibitions and articles. Perhaps from him. No, that wasn't it. This was more recent. It was local. I activated my Internet Explorer and inputted in the query field: custom dark wheels, pilfered local reports. I activated my search. The outcomes appeared: numerous different accounts. I scanned the titles: vehicle theft organization dismantled, authorities alert on exhaust converter thefts. And then I noticed it. The title read, local impaired former service members custom wheels pilfered in bold storage theft. The article was from the local publication dated recently. My heart accelerated slightly. I selected the connection. The account was about a man named Sergeant Frank Peterson, a retired military veteran who had lost a limb in service. He'd been restoring a classic, powerful vehicle, a project to occupy his hands and mind. Someone had intruded into his secured storage overnight and pilfered the 4 custom wheels and tires he had recently acquired for the vehicle. They were his pride. And right in the middle of the article was a picture. It was a photo Frank Peterson had taken of one of the wheels right after purchase, sitting on a storage floor. I displayed the photo on one side of my screen and my paused recording footage on the other. My breath halted. It was them. No uncertainty. The same numerous thin spokes, the same shiny dark finish, the same polished metallic rim. They were an exact, undeniable match. I read the remainder of the article. The veteran was devastated. The wheels were a specific custom order and valued highly. The authorities had no suspects. The article listed the make and model of the wheels. I performed a quick search for that brand. They were premium special order edges. Not something you acquire at the local tire outlet. This wasn't some youth committing a foolish error. This was a serious theft. I felt a surge of cold, firm assurance. Ryan Jameson, the youth who thought he was beyond regulations, who operated like a lunatic, who nearly struck my spouse, was traveling on stolen goods. Goods stolen from an impaired former service member. The sheer corrupt presumption of it all made me ill. I printed the news article. I took a high-clarity capture from my recording showing the wheel on the sports vehicle with my dwelling number visible in the background, proving the site. I placed the 2 images adjacent in a document and printed that, too. This was the instrument I had been seeking. It was larger and superior than I could have envisioned. This wasn't about group regulations anymore. This wasn't about disturbance complaints or yard sprites. This was genuine. This was an offense. I had proof. Not just group proof, but really call the investigators proof. And as I lifted the device, looking at the image of that smiling veteran and the wheels he had been so proud of, I knew that's exactly what I was going to do. I didn't contact emergency. This wasn't an active crisis. This required a more subtle approach. I contacted the authorities' non-crisis number and requested connection to the investigator section. That I explained that I had information regarding the Frank Peterson theft case. The operator sounded surprised but connected me. A rough tone answered, Investigator Miller. I recognized the name. He was one of the officials who had been there at the conclusion with the sports vehicle on supports. It seemed appropriate he would be there at the start, too. I introduced myself and presented it calmly and factually. Investigator, my name is Lyle Stanford. I believe I have located the wheels and tires that were pilfered from Sergeant Peterson. They are currently on a Crimson Sports vehicle belonging to my neighbor. There was a pause on the other end. I could imagine him reclining in a creaky seat, probably thinking I was just another eccentric neighbor with a grudge. "And how did you obtain this information, Mr. Stanford?" I explained about the protection recorder, the near collision with my spouse, and how I identified the wheels from the news article. I told him I had high-clarity images and recordings. His tone altered. The doubt was replaced by professional curiosity. "Can you send those files to me?" he asked, providing his address. "That I'm sending them immediately," I said. I added the news connection and a marked still of the wheel beside my dwelling number. No speculation, just proof. I also attached the original recording file and stills data, so marks and location would be valid. I attached the recording segment, the adjacent photo comparison, and the connection to the news article. I activated send. Shortly after, my device rang again. It was Miller. "Mr. Stanford," he said, and now his tone was sharp, focused. "This is solid. This is very solid." The producer imprints a sequence number on the interior of the edge on that particular model. If we can examine that, we can confirm positively. "The vehicle is usually here in the morning," I told him. "He stations it on the lane. Sometimes he stations it in the accessible area in front of my dwelling." I heard him chuckle, a dry, humorless sound. "I bet he does. Okay, Lyle, here's what I'd like to do. I don't want to alarm him. Can you contact me tomorrow morning as soon as you see the vehicle?" "Absolutely," I said. We discussed for additional moments, and he outlined the plan. It was straightforward. He and his associate would be nearby in an unmarked vehicle. I'd provide the signal, and they'd manage the rest. I barely rested that night. I kept verifying the recorders, observing the empty lane. The next morning, I was awake before illumination, sitting in my dim living space, observing and waiting. I heard the familiar howl. The Crimson Sports vehicle rolled onto the pathway, and my jaw nearly dropped. With all the open areas on the lane, with his own empty entry path right there, Ryan positioned his vehicle right into the Azure-accessible area. The sheer unbridled presumption of it was astonishing. He thought he was invulnerable. I lifted my device and sent a simple message to Investigator Miller. "He's here in the area." The reply arrived instantly. "En route." Shortly after, a plain dark sedan I'd never seen eased onto the pathway and stationed nearby. Two men in casual attire exited. Miller was one, a large, sturdy guy with weary eyes. His associate was younger, slimmer. They approached my dwelling, and I stepped onto the veranda to greet them. I just gestured toward the sports vehicle. "There it is," I said quietly. Miller gestured back. They approached the vehicle, calm as possible, and crouched to examine the wheels. That's when Ryan's entrance burst open. He must have been observing from the opening. "Hey!" he yelled, storming toward them. "Depart from my vehicle." "What are you doing?" Miller rose slowly. He displayed his credential. "Authorities, young man. We're just examining." Ryan scoffed, his chest expanded. "I don't care who you are. You can't contact my vehicle without authorization." "We're not contacting it," Miller said, his tone dangerously serene. "We're examining what's visible, and what's visible appears to be pilfered goods. These wheels match the description of a set pilfered in a serious theft recently." Ryan's expression went from arrogant to alarmed. He advanced toward Miller, getting directly in his face. "You're insane. I acquired these. You can't prove anything." And then he committed the most foolish act possible. He pushed Investigator Miller in the chest. It wasn't a forceful push, more of a frustrated nudge, but it was sufficient. Instantly, Miller's associate stepped between them, his palm resting on his side. "Don't do that," he said, his tone low and firm. Miller didn't flinch. "One more movement, and you're restrained," he said, calm as stillness. The atmosphere tensed. Ryan looked from one serious, unimpressed investigator to the other. The boldness drained from him like air from a punctured wheel. He retreated, his palms up. He finally seemed to realize he wasn't dealing with his mother's group rules anymore. He should have kept his palms to himself. That one foolish push just turned a good offense investigation into something much more personal for the officials. The push altered everything. The environment went from a quiet inquiry to a tense confrontation instantly. Investigator Miller didn't even react. He just looked at Ryan with an expression of deep disappointment. The way an educator looks at a pupil who can't grasp the simplest lesson. "Attacking an official is a serious offense, young man," Miller said, his tone even. Right now, I'm more concerned with these wheels, but you continue pushing and we can discuss that too. You want to go to the station? Ryan, for the first time, looked frightened. He shook his head, silent. Miller turned to his associate. Retrieve the reflector. The younger investigator went to their vehicle and returned with a small expandable reflector like a dental professional uses and a powerful small illuminator. He knelt by the front wheel, angled the reflector correctly, and shone the light on it. He was silent for a period, and then he looked up at Miller and nodded. Got it. It's a match. Those 5 words were the most pleasing I'd ever heard. Miller looked at Ryan. The sequence number on this wheel matches the one pilfered from Sergeant Frank Peterson. You want to attempt to acquire them again? Ryan just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a creature. He had nothing. No story, no justification. He was apprehended. Miller retrieved his device. I'm going to require a uniformed team and a removal vehicle sent to this site. He then looked over at me on my veranda and gave me a slight, almost unnoticed nod. It was completed. A uniformed authorities cruiser arrived shortly after, followed by the same large municipal removal vehicle that had missed its opportunity previously, but this time it wasn't here to remove the vehicle. The uniformed official, a young woman with a no-frills expression, was the one I recognized as Officer Brady. She exited her vehicle, took one look at the sports vehicle in the accessible area, and retrieved her citation book. That's when Karen arrived. She must have heard the disturbance. She came advancing down the lane, her expression a storm cloud. What is occurring here? She demanded, her tone echoing in the quiet morning atmosphere. Why are you bothering my offspring? Miller turned to face her. Madam, your offspring is in possession of pilfered goods. We are seizing these wheels and tires as proof in a serious inquiry. Karen's jaw dropped. That's absurd. These are his wheels. He compensated for them. Then he should have no issue providing us with a proof of purchase, Miller said dryly. He knew, and I knew there was no proof. The removal vehicle operator, meanwhile, was commencing work. He wasn't attaching the vehicle. Per the investigator's directives, he unloaded 4 sturdy masonry units and a hydraulic lift to secure the sports vehicle while the proof was removed. As neighbors began to peek from their openings, attracted by the flashing illuminations, the operator lifted the front of the sports vehicle, unfastened the first pilfered wheel, and handed it to Miller's associate, who carefully placed it in a proof container. Then he lowered the vehicle's axle onto a unit. The unit sat firmly under the frame, no instability, just as the guide specifies. He repeated the procedure 1 wheel at a time. It was a gradual, systematic, and profoundly embarrassing process. Karen just stood there fumbling words. This is bothering me. I'm the group leader. I will have your credentials. Officer Brady, who had finished composing the parking citation, approached and calmly attempted to hand it to Karen. Madam, this is for the unlawful parking offense. Karen struck the citation away. I'm not paying that. This is my area. Brady just bent down, retrieved the citation, and placed it under the sports vehicle's front glass wiper right on the pane in front of the control wheel. Madam, she said, her patience evidently waning. The group doesn't have authority over state law, municipal rules, or serious theft. This is an authorities matter. The scene was ideal. The crimson sports vehicle, a symbol of Ryan's presumption, was now sitting helplessly on 4 unsightly units. The pilfered wheels were being labeled and loaded into the removal vehicle's bed as proof that a bright-colored parking citation was fluttering in the breeze on the front glass. And a small group of my neighbors was now observing, several of them with their devices out recording the whole event. The powerful Jamesons were finally receiving what they merited. And the best part, it wasn't concluded yet. There was still the matter of the group. An urgent assembly had been summoned for that evening to discuss recent disruptions. I sensed it was Karen's final attempt to penalize me, but I was prepared. I had my folder of proof, my printed messages, and a small portable drive with all my recording segments. The Queen was about to be outmaneuvered right in the center of her own domain. The community facility that evening was crowded. Usually, a group assembly attracts minimal attendees. Tonight, it was at full capacity. The story of a sports vehicle on units had spread through the area rapidly. Everyone was present, humming with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Karen and Ryan were notably missing. Nancy and I found seats near the front. I had my portable computer and a small transportable displayer in my bag. I was ready. The assembly was supposed to be conducted by the deputy leader, a timid little man named George. But before he could commence, Karen entered late with a look of stern resolve on her face. She advanced to the front of the space and seized the amplifier. "Appreciate you all for attending," she began, her tone strained. "There have been some regrettable incidents in our community fueled by false information and personal grudges. We are here tonight to address the numerous offenses filed against the resident at 112 Falls Pathway. She was actually proceeding with it. She was going to attempt to penalize me for the Sprite." The sheer audacity was astonishing. A few individuals in the audience murmured. I saw my opportunity. I rose. "On a matter of procedure, Madam Leader," I said, my tone calm and loud enough to fill the space. Karen glared at me. "You are out of procedure, Lyle. Sit down." "According to the regulations," I said, holding up a printed copy, "any participant can raise a matter of procedure," Karen attempted. "Watch your manners." I grinned. "Tonight, we're observing facts, and these offenses are irrelevant and completely fabricated." George, the deputy leader, looked from me to Karen, terrified. "He's right, Karen. The regulations do say that." Karen's face tightened, but she was trapped. "Fine," she snapped. "You have limited time." "Appreciate you," I said. I approached the front of the space, set up my portable computer, and connected the displayer. An image of the false Sprite offense message filled the screen behind me. "This is the offense I received," I explained, "for Yard Sprite. I contacted the administration firm, and they confirmed there is no such rule in our regulations. This offense is an invention. It is a fabrication sent shortly after I called the parking authority on Karen's offspring for unlawfully parking in an accessible area." I advanced to the next display. It was a picture of the Crimson sports vehicle in the Azure area, an official municipally mandated area which, as the Municipal Planning Division confirmed to me, the group has zero authority over. I could feel the atmosphere in the space shifting. People were leaning forward, listening attentively. I then played the recordings. First, the engine is accelerating. The sound filled the space, and people winced. Then, the recording of the youth falling into Mr. Henderson's postal container. Mr. Henderson, a quiet elderly man in the back, gasped. "So that's what occurred," he exclaimed. Finally, I played the most important segment, the footage from a storage recorder. The whole space watched in silence as the Crimson sports vehicle flew around the bend, wheels screeching and narrowly missing hitting Nancy. There was a collective intake of breath. Several people turned to look at Nancy, who sat there calm and composed. "This isn't about sprites or turf height," I said, my tone ringing with an anger I didn't attempt to conceal. "This is about a pattern of bothering, intimidation, and hazardous behavior, all sanctioned and protected by our group leader because it's her offspring. She has misused her authority, invented rules to punish those who disagree with her, and ignored real offenses, destruction, hazardous operating, public disturbance, because her family was committing them." I paused, allowing my words to absorb. And this behavior culminated in the authorities seizing pilfered goods from her offspring's vehicle. Goods pilfered from an impaired veteran. The space erupted. Everyone started speaking simultaneously. Karen stood there pale and shaking. For once, completely silent. Then another neighbor, a woman named Sarah, who Karen had penalized for having the wrong shade of trim on her dwelling, rose. "She's been doing this for years," she shouted. "She threatened me with a claim on my dwelling." One by one, others rose, sharing their own stories of Karen's intimidation and abuse of authority. It was like a barrier had broken. All the fear and resentment people had suppressed for years came pouring out. Finally, Mr. Henderson rose. "I propose a motion," he said, his tone trembling with emotion. "I propose to dissolve the current group panel and to begin proceedings to dissolve the Fallswood Domains Homeowners Association entirely, as it has clearly failed to serve the interests of this community." "Seconded," shouted numerous voices at once. George, the deputy leader, looking like he was about to collapse, called for a vote. It wasn't close. A multitude of hands rose in favor of the motion. Only one hand remained down. Karen's. The ruler was deposed. The fortress was collapsing. All that remained was to tidy the disorder and enjoy the peace we had just battled for and secured. The consequences were rapid and conclusive. With the group panel officially dissolved, a team of volunteer residents, myself included, took over to manage the legal process of dismantling the entire organization. We engaged a legal expert who specialized in community groups, and he discovered that Karen had been misappropriating funds for years, paying for her personal yard maintenance out of the group budget, covering her offspring's vehicle protection with community fees. It was all in the financial records. The state became involved. Karen and Ryan were suddenly facing much more than a parking citation. Ryan was accused of serious possession of pilfered goods and minor attack on an official. Karen was facing accusations of misappropriation and deception. The Jameson dwelling was listed for sale shortly after. We never saw them again. The best part for me was the day a municipal works vehicle arrived. Two men exited with containers of bright azure coating and applicators. They removed the old faded boundaries of my parking area and applied a fresh, brilliant layer. They recoat the mobility symbol large and pale and beautiful. It was a minor thing, but it felt like a monumental success. That same period, a note arrived in our postal container. It was from Sergeant Frank Peterson. He wrote that the authorities had returned his wheels, and he was so appreciative for our assistance. He'd even included a gift voucher to our preferred local eatery. Nancy and I went, and we toasted to him and to a bit of equity in the world. Shortly before the sale indicator appeared, there was a quiet tap on our door. I opened it to find Karen Jameson standing there. She wasn't in professional attire. She was in simple casual wear, and she looked small, defeated. "Lyle," she said, her tone barely audible. "I just wanted to say I'm regretful." I looked at her. I saw the woman who had threatened me, who had demeaned my spouse, who had enabled her offspring's hazardous behavior, who had made our lives difficult over minor imagined offenses. And I felt nothing. No sympathy, no rage, just a vast void that I thought about all the things I could say. I could have boasted. I could have instructed her. I could have accepted her regret with some meaningless phrase like, "We all err." But none felt appropriate. Nancy came and stood beside me. She looked at Karen, gave a slight, polite, but firm acknowledgement, and then looked back at me. I took the hint. I didn't utter a word. I just slowly, quietly closed the door. Some things can't be repaired with regret. Some things just need to be concluded, and so it concluded. The group was eliminated, replaced by a simple voluntary neighborhood committee that planned the annual gathering and managed the seasonal decorations. The area was quieter, more amicable. People started conversing more. The fear was gone. On a beautiful, clear afternoon, Nancy and I were returning from the provision store. I positioned our vehicle right into the freshly coated azure area. It felt good. I exited, my limbs support giving its familiar creak as I stepped onto the surface. That I grabbed my walking aid from the rear seat and stood there momentarily, just looking at our little dwelling, at Norman the Sprite still standing proudly in his floral bed. Nancy came around the vehicle and took my hand. "Think it's finally concluded?" she asked, a gentle grin on her face. If you've ever had to battle for an azure box, indicate approval and share the proofs. I looked at the empty entry path where the Crimson Sports vehicle used to sit, a constant reminder of presumption and privilege. Now, it was just an empty section of concrete. The silence was wonderful. I squeezed her hand and grinned. "For them it is," I said, winking at her. "For us, I'm just beginning." I gestured toward the Sprite. "You know, I think Norman needs a little cap. Maybe a tiny angling garment, too." Nancy laughed. A real happy laugh. That was the best sound in the world. And as we walked up to our front door, I knew we were finally at peace.